Welcome to the Frenos webinar. Cancel your ransomware subscription. Kind of good play on words, talking about ransomware and such within OT, industrial control systems. Um, Joined here today is Christina from Forescout. How you doing, Christina?
Hi, Harry. Thanks so much for inviting me to the webinar. I'm doing great, and I'm really excited for this topic.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely. So to kind of set the stage for everybody, we got a couple of slides to show. Make sure everybody's on the same page. A little bit of demo, but this is going to be kind of back and forth between Christina and I talking about Frenos and Forescout and working together. So Christina, why don't you kind of introduce yourself and introduce Forescout for those unaware?
yeah, sure. So, my name is Christina Hofer. I lead strategy for our industrial verticals here at Forescout. Been in cybersecurity, in particular industrial cybersecurity, for what is it now, 20 years almost. It's been super exciting. And Forescout, as many of you know, is a leader in cybersecurity solutions. So we develop software, particularly to assess, discover, and respond to all the risks and threats that we see across all the risk-averse verticals. So anything from critical infrastructure, energy utilities, manufacturing, but also financial and government sectors. And we provide, asset intelligence across all the different connected assets, threat detection, and then also native response capabilities through segmentation and orchestration across our ecosystem partners such as Frenos.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm definitely glad to be part of that ecosystem, Christina. Here, let's go to the next slide, talk about the Frenos platform, but I'll give a little bit of an introduction of myself for those who don't know. Harry Thomas, I'm the CTO and one of the founders of Frenos. I've been in industrial cybersecurity for a little over a decade now. Actually, funny enough, Christina and I, when we first met, the Security Matter days, that was like my first foray into OT cybersecurity, pretty much. So really, Christina and I go way back, go way back. I've worked at other places too, beyond Forescout, Dragos. I led research and development there, and most recently, prior to starting Frenos, I led an AI ML engineering team at AWS Security, protects pretty much against threats impersonating employees digitally, which was pretty cool. So let's talk about Frenos. What do we do? So our platform essentially is the a data aggregation and analytic tool. We work with vendors, OT vendors, IT vendors, segmentation vendors to ingest all this data. We build what we call a digital twin or a network replica, whichever name you would prefer to utilize. What we do is we take in segmentation information that builds the basis of the network replica. We take asset, device, vulnerability information from IT vendors or OT vendors, much like Forescout, additional adversarial and exploit intelligence. And then what we have is our simulated adversarial intelligence reasoning agent. We've named her Syra. And her whole goal is to link together and chain weaknesses within the digital twin, no impact to production at all, um, to try and exploit and get to crown jewels while also providing the risk reducing recommendations on the side to help you prioritize and possibly stop future threats from taking advantage of what we found within the digital twin.
And Harry, this
Now,
is all on-prem, right?
yes, it is. It's entirely on-prem. Yeah, yeah. We take advantage of that. We run on commodity hardware. We can run anywhere from a laptop to a server. You can even put it in your own cloud if you prefer. I know that a lot of oil and gas utilizes cloud architecture for everything. But yeah, entirely on-prem. All we ask is that you have some sort of GPU graphics card to, large language models and machine learning models run faster on graphics cards. So that's what we ask for you. And then obviously Forescout, right? I mean, you guys are both on-prem in the cloud. I mean, you guys are kind of everywhere.
Oh yeah, I mean the sensors themselves, they're obviously on-prem, but they can run on just existing network architecture, for example, deployed on commodity hardware, our own proprietary hardware, pretty much anywhere. And then yeah, the cloud is an add-on. I'm just asking because with NERC for example, there's often restrictions. So this is a great way to actually leverage all of that on-prem without having to worry about the compliance issues.
Yeah, that was kind of the thesis of when I was working on developing the Frenos platform back in the day before Frenos even was a twinkle in my eye. But yeah, on prem, definitely we had to adhere to compliance and regulatory reasons and data privacy, obviously. So you can run us air gapped, literally rip out the network card if you want to. The only reason why we're attached to the internet is to get updates to our vulnerability catalog, updates for adversary information, and then platform updates too. You're able to update the platform pretty much anytime you want.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so let's talk about ransomware. I mean, Christina, your team at Forescout does a lot of threat research and whatnot, and I think ransomware was one of the things that you guys kind of produced over the course of the past 6 months. Why don't you give us a little kind of
Yeah,
tidbit
sure.
about this?
So yeah, at Forescout we have a research group called Videra Labs, and we study all of the data that we get from customers, so metadata, what type of assets do they have, then we can do vulnerability research on that, and we also monitor threat actors. And so one of the things that we've seen is that the trend across all of the cyber attacks is towards ransomware. So before, it was the Stuxnet and the very specialized attacks, but now there are even groups, right? Ransomware as a service, and you can just go out and find exploits. You can, pretty much find an exploit that spans across every type of connected device, from an IT device to an OT device, even, IP cameras. And with all of that research, unfortunately, that also means that, there are some adversaries making use of this data and exploiting it. There's even hacktivists just taking this data, the ones that don't actually have this deep background can now exploit this information. And here's some examples across the different verticals, right? It doesn't matter if you're a critical infrastructure or an energy company, that is really crucial, or a small utility that is just doing something in a rural area. Anybody can be a target. And here we see, I put a couple of examples here on the slide, like a wind turbine manufacturer that had to, shut down production because in IT, some crucial systems were hit. Or same with an automotive manufacturer. They weren't sure if that IT system, it was again logistics, I think, for order management, that was hit, and they weren't sure if it would propagate to OT. So what do? They halt production. And it just goes on and on like that. And most of the time, it's still lucky, the attack goes into IT, and with good containment, it can stay there. But it's often exactly that interconnectivity that leads to OT being impacted, even if the OT device itself is not attacked. And so we study these attacks, but it's kind of scary to see that across these, we have different honeypots in different regions. Just from 2023 to 2024, we saw a big increase, and the biggest increase was actually the type of attacks. So proprietary protocols being exploited and really going after those critical infrastructure processes.
That's interesting. I was gonna ask, is it more of those like interconnected IT OT devices, like a historian and stuff like that, that are being targeted, or is it actually like people going after the Schweitzer gear and stuff too?
So actually it's none of the two. What we see as one of the most targeted devices is like network gear, because it's often already exposed. It has, internet connectivity. So we see a lot of routers and switches. We also see uninterruptible power supplies, like those things that you don't really think about. Hey, that's not my crown jewel. It's a supporting service to your process. And from there, the adversaries move laterally, like, hey, from a IP camera that might be exposed. They always have web services and such, right? You can move to the recording server. From there, you can move further. And then eventually you could actually get to that historian, or you could get to that specific OT device.
Yeah, yeah. So somebody just posted in the question and answer talking about ransomware hitting IT and not the operational process. OT harming the process is not likely to happen. Sounds like more of a statement than anything else. Kind of what do you think about that? I mean, I have my own answer, but I want to hear from you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's IT is traditionally much more connected. You get a lot of, moving devices, users logging in, moving on and off the network. It's just much more dynamic. OT, we still see a lot of legacy devices, which I actually think is a good thing. Legacy is often more secure because it's analog. You don't have all the smart features enabled. It's much simpler to lock that down. And so the other thing is in OT we have fault systems, right? If something is going on, you can always revert to manual operations. So from that point of view, I agree that it's not directly going to be hitting OT systems as much as the news make it to be.
Yeah, that
What,
makes
what do you
sense.
think?
Yeah, kind of my thought about it is like, yeah, the OT process isn't going to be hindered. Let's talk about electric utility, right? The substation, will still pass electricity through it and whatnot, and service where it needs to go. I think kind of the key thing to think about is like it's like that visibility of the OT process that kind of gets hindered, right? If the historian or any sort of OPC UA server gets ransomware, like yeah, we can go manual operations. Operations will still continue. That's great and all, but like that visibility into think about multiple electric utilities trying to manage the voltage right on what they're sharing between each other utilizing like synchrophaser and stuff like without kind of the
Yeah, maintenance
visibility into
operations
the
will halt,
yeah
because hey, do
exactly.
we have the visibility that everything is disabled, that we can send somebody up the tower, whatever it is, for sure. And I mean, I've been studying some of these attacks as well, and just see that the pattern is usually an IT system that was thought to be, it has nothing to do with OT, somehow is a dependent object, right, in the whole OT process. And it could be it's just tracking the warehouse stock or taking orders, or like I think it was an automotive manufacturer was like, yeah, we have this system where you can customize until almost the last day of production, your car, right, which color you want, what kind of seat you want. And so from that point of view, they want that connectivity, but
Mm,
it's not considered to be an OT asset. And so it often falls
right.
outside of that scope of what, is being protected with, the perimeter and all the safeguards.
Yeah, that's interesting, not declaring it an OT asset, right? That's how we kind of I guess that's how we in OT kind of say that like that's not my problem, right?
Yeah.
Ransomware's hitting it, it might affect me, but that's not my problem. The same individual, making that statement prior about ransomware, he mentions that I think it's he, OT cyber attacks may happen, but ransomware will not happen because we are not authorized to use decrypting key due to risk of safety. I'm
Well,
not
I
exactly sure what
actually,
that means, but
yeah, no,
can
I
you answer
think I
that?
know what he's referring to. So, well, actually, I would actually say that looking at the trend recently with all the ransomware as a service providers, normally, their whole mantra as well, if you pay, we give you the key and you can decrypt. We've actually seen
Hmm.
that the trend is that it's not as reliable as it used to be. So many organizations don't even assume that they can use the key, even if they could, because what if they tamper with your data? What if they're still planted some backdoors? So from a safety
Right.
aspect, totally makes sense that you may not even want to decrypt data and then boot up from that, but instead you just want to restore it to a clean image,
Yeah,
and
that
you may
makes
never
sense. And
get the key.
yeah, you may never get the key, right? Broken promises right there. Yeah, so on our side of Frenos, our chief hacking officer, Colin Murphy, kind of took in some of Forescout's research, and we actually made it come to life inside our platform. But so there were some key tidbits that he shared with me that I'd like to share with you, Christina. Based off of like those ransomware groups that you guys had inside your threat report, he was able to dig in and find that like the ransomware as a service, like most people working for ransomware as a service don't actually know that they're working for ransomware as a service. They think they're working for a real company with HR and everything like that. They think they're working on pen testing tools and whatnot, writing all of this type of capabilities. So I thought that was pretty enlightening. If you guys don't aren't familiar, Colin Murphy, previous CIO of Know Before, joined Frenos earlier this year, and he was really tight with Kevin Mitnick. If you're not familiar with Kevin Mitnick, you can look him up. There are a slew of articles about him, but let's just say Colin is a one of a kind hacker. Always, once a hacker, always a hacker. I feel the same way. I was a hacker back in the day, so I feel it, especially with DEF CON coming up. We're able to kind of look at the ransomware by industry. This was posted by Unit 42 from Palo Alto. We're able to kind of condense it and make it more into a percentage. Um, what do you see on here, Christina, that really stands out to you?
Well, the manufacturing, it's really the critical industries that are being hit. They suffer the most. They are exposed. So yeah, that's definitely one of the trends here.
Yeah, one thing that I was really surprised on was that education is getting hit more than healthcare. That was one thing that I was looking at, and especially like additionally with like telecommunication and transportation. With Salt Typhoon and whatnot. Like I'm surprised that ransomware hasn't really caught and dug their nails into those industries just yet.
I
But
think it's
obviously,
because of the type of assets you see and the protocols. Transportation, telecommunication is still very proprietary, and it's
mm,
not much research, right? Whereas education, a lot of IT estate, right? A lot of interconnected systems, and healthcare has already been doing a lot. It's one of our biggest growing markets. So healthcare is investing a lot in really not just detecting and managing assets, but to bolt them down as you want. Like really restricting access to those X-ray machines. They often use XP systems, so just restricting everything to just the one protocol and the one system that is allowed to access it, and everything else is just denied. So
okay,
yeah,
well, that's good to know. Good information. So let's look at Franos and Forescout together within the Purdue model. Kind of Christina, let's talk about Forescout capabilities and whatnot within OT and even IT. Actually, Forescout has some great IT products as well, and then I'll talk about kind of how we wrap all that information into Franos.
yeah, sure. So yeah, the first step is really to understand what's connecting. So we do that with various techniques. So we monitor using deep packet inspection, especially if you're in an OT network or in a medical network. So from that traffic, you can actually extract so much information, right? The firmware version, the type of device, and that then helps us to do further assessment. Sometimes we also pair this with active queries. So, maybe that PLC is not really sharing enough information. It's not communicating as much. And so because of that, we will then use an active query using the proprietary protocol to that PLC and be like, hey, tell us about your firmware version. We want to know. Tell us about your configuration. And that way, again, we have more data to do the assessment. And then if you talk to IT systems, right, there's so much you can leverage, like a ServiceNow integration and all the switches, for example, Active Directory, but also, some of the tools that are running on endpoints can provide you information. And so you build that full asset inventory with the insights and risk profiles per device. And yeah, that then allows us to do the threat detection, vulnerability matching, and just move on into, what should we be doing next? And I think that's where Frenos comes
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, definitely. The Freno Sports Scout kind of integration is pretty cool. So we take in, all that data that Forescout produces and whatnot. And like I said prior about the platform, right? We build that digital twin. And much like any data analytic tool, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And what I found that Forescout definitely has a great wealth of information and data available to be harnessed and utilized. One thing, I would probably say to the audience out there, right? I mean, we've all seen the OT visibility journey start almost a decade ago, right? Maybe even more. I don't even know. And a lot of companies have been running a Forescout for 7, 8 years now, you have 7, 8 years of data, right? What are you doing? My question to you is like, what are you doing to harness it? Are you putting, you can try and put in like Power BI and stuff like that. I've seen it go
Yeah,
right,
actually,
and I've
our
seen it.
research team is leveraging that data. The all the metadata goes into a huge data sphere where we run then all the research on. So, for example, there was a new malware detected, and we can find out, which industries actually affected by that. We can look at our own install base, what type of
Mhm.
systems are deployed, in utilities versus manufacturing. Is it maybe just in the US or in Europe? So we can do all those kind of comparisons just looking at our own data, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely is. I mean, we do kind of the same way with our metadata here at Frenos. We can see TTP trends and whatnot that are allowed within the digital twin, allowed within Cyber to utilize to attack. And obviously, it kind of helps us inform our customers on the industries, right, on what they should probably focus on. Now, there's one bullet point on this slide that I kind of want to talk about. So Frenos will prioritize the recommendations and remediations to help like deter future adversaries and stuff from
How do
utilizing
you
what we
do
found.
that?
It's quite interesting. So there's communication pathways, right? There's the art of the possible with segmentation configurations, firewall switches, and stuff like that, right? You know what can talk to what, right? It's not like what Forescout is doing, where you have like this. These are the active communication pathways that we're seeing. We're looking at that as well, and we're overlaying it on top of the network topology on what can actually speak to what policies are allowed to, let's say RDP and through this network to another asset if that asset had that service running. Now, the key thing with Syra, the AI and machine learning models we utilize, machine learning models and AI is all statistical probability, right? We take in that asset vulnerability data that's utilized, that's produced by Forescout, and we utilize it to identify key conditions, particular asset that would help us utilize a particular TTP or exploit, right? If the
Hmm.
exploit's on the CAD, we also work to reverse engineer proof of concept exploits for certain CVEs to really understand those key conditions that need to be met inside the digital twin, right? So from a Frenos perspective, we say give us all your data, right? You have CSV exports, you have a Forescout, you utilize Rapid7 or Tenable Nessus. Give it all to us, because the more data we have, the more ways we can figure out different specific conditions that need to be met in order to exploit or move laterally or even disrupt the process if possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, most customers I speak with, they're like, well, we have so many tools, and they all produce all these alerts and logs and data. And at some point you just turn it off because you're just like, well, I can't do anything about this. And the next maintenance window is right 6 months down the line. So now you actually help with correlating, right, all of the data and finding that one pass that they need to patch in the next 6 months in that maintenance window, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not just like what you need to patch, but it's also like validating, some customers would have like 10, 100,000 vulnerabilities, right? And they're looking at their vulnerability team. They're like, we need another 3, 4 vulnerability analysts to help us
Yeah.
figure all this out. And in reality, most of those vulnerabilities, either there are no conditions that can be met to execute that exploit, or the other one is like there's no pathway there. If there's no
Hmm.
pathway there, service isn't running and all that stuff, just because you have the vulnerability doesn't really matter, right? Like
Yeah.
that can be pushed to a later objective. If you really want to have that cybersecurity hygiene, or your board is coming down, or your CISO is coming down saying, hey, we got to clean up these vulnerabilities. But what we found is that utilizing Frenos platform mixed with Forescout data, uh, it's really giving the architects and the analysts leverage to push back and say, these aren't the things that we should be working on, Mr. Director, CISO, but based off of the data that we have, we're utilizing data to drive our decisions. This is what we should be investing our time in,
Right.
eliminating these pathways.
You're actually also developing proof that way, right? Here's proof that these are not the exploits and risks that we need to address. It's already, protected. We need to focus on the other ones.
Right, right, exactly. We need to focus on the other ones, the other pathways, or the other. We call them transient networks or transient assets.
Mhm.
It's a little bit different than just taking a laptop and moving from network to network. We call them transient because you have to go in between them, and they're a choke point for most attack paths. And those particular networks or assets is what we try to help our customers focus on. Now, one other bullet point to get to. So, Forescout implements security policies to protect at risk, risky assets and networks. How does Forescout do that?
Yeah. Before we dive into that, I wanted to ask you, what are the typical paths that you see in ransomware and cyber attacks?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, we'll see it in the demo, but it's it's really like those the DMZ is always pretty good, right? In general, but it's those like IT/OT business apps, right? That are always like they're interconnected, and due to whatever reason, I have this saying: there's nothing more permanent than a temporary firewall rule. A firewall rule gets opened, somebody forgets about it, from the change control board, and it's been there forever. And it was used to facilitate some sort of maintenance or something like that with these ITOT business apps. And that's kind of like the key way that I've been seeing inside customers, inside some research that we've been producing internally of how ransomware or even threat actors are even manipulating their way around the network to get away from these compensating controls that you've implemented in key areas.
Exactly. And that's, where Forescout can help, right? So these security policies really help to eliminate those kind of temporary firewalls, shared user accounts, default credentials. So yeah, we help customers to actually automate this. So especially if you're talking about those IT systems that are also installed in OT networks, we can actually, have also ways to for example, say the account needs to change, we need to change default passwords, we need to restrict access, block USB ports. There's many ways that you can actually already prevent malware from even getting to that system. And then, of course, from a segmentation point of view, like in healthcare, they're taking it very far to really say, this system only needs to access that other one and nobody else should be allowed to connect. You could also take it a level further and say, we have a vendor coming on site, they need access temporarily. Don't put it in the firewall, but instead, open up the network for this vendor if there's a work order and only give them access to those systems. And at the end of that operation, you stop again with those extra rules so they don't become permanent.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, exactly, exactly. Here, I think, where's
I
my
think it's a good time to show the
mouse?
demo.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna have this screen up for right now while I pull up the demo. If anybody wants to take a screenshot or send us an email or something like that later on after this.
If anybody has more questions or just wants to learn more about the latest threat research, we have a newsletter on that, which is just purely on research. We have also the dashboard online, which tracks like the latest adversaries, the latest vulnerabilities. So that's always a good point to start digging into this topic.
Yes, definitely. Let me pull up my browser.
All right.
All right,
Yeah, I can see
so
it.
we can see it. Wonderful,
Yep.
wonderful. So this is running in the cloud right now. Partially due to internet issues. But this is our prioritized dashboard. This is gives you kind of a quick snapshot. We have a score, a platform security score based off of everything else. Top five threat actors. Some of these look pretty familiar, Christina, and an action center. But what we really care about is really trying to dive deep into the attack paths. Demo gods always getting at you right now. Let me try to do 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 do. Now, one key thing while the graph is rebuilding, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, we're rebuilding the graph right now. Is this right here? So we have a very network focus centric focus on kind of how we look at your digital twin and your environment, and we take an assumed breach procedure. Now we see a whole bunch of these things kind of turned on as a starting point in business impact. Now we look at everything from a high business impact to critical business impact. We call critical business impact like your crown jewels, right?
Yeah, like
That
downtime is expected in production.
Right, right, exactly. And obviously this was fictitious for the demo, so there's a lot of things that are mixed together. But that's kind of how our attack paths start. That's how Cyrus starts. And you gotta wait just a moment, but maybe we'll be able to get this graph to rebuild real quick. Um, Demo gods
So this is
are
building the
against me.
digital twin. Is that what's happening right now?
Yeah, yeah, it's rebuilding the digital twin. That's what's happening right now. But obviously, there's some key issues. Either with my network connectivity or something along the lines of that. So I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, if I'm going to be able to show attack paths, but we can definitely show the defend records. Now, these defend records is, what you should focus on to stop potential things, right? So we have, some of these like static visibility findings, right? This is definitely what can help Forescout out, especially our customers place certain sensors in certain areas because we definitely need
Hmm.
assets per network in order to ensure that we have those conditions that we're meeting for exploitability or for lateral movement, stuff like that.
Yeah, like
So
you
that's
want to
what.
know what firewalls are set up, what switches, what the connectivity is,
Yes,
vulnerabilities,
exactly.
obviously. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we can also take a look at like some you know CVEs and stuff that you should look at, that you should possibly mitigate. A lot of this information is generated through our vulnerability catalog, and some of it is generated from Syra herself. If I go right here and I just clicked on Syra's prioritize threats, what
Hmm.
she is doing is she takes the attack paths themselves, right, and breaks down each individual step. And then within each individual step, there's generally some sort of key mitigation that you can implement to stop either lateral movement or force or deter the threat actor to think differently. So this
Yeah.
one's talking about pass the hash. Pass the hash was allowed inside this particular attack path to some substation equipment, probably some sort of server or something like that in the substation. And you can look at the mitigation reasoning and whatnot and how to stop this or move past it itself. Now, one key thing about this kind of page is that because this is a digital twin, right? You can almost perform like what if type scenarios where you're like, all right, let's say I have a compensating control for this. You can implement these, either real or fictitious compensating controls. And what happens is Styro will rerun the attack paths altogether to let you know whether this compensating control did some sort of effect or not, right? And I
Hmm.
think this is kind of key with Forescout because you guys have a slew of products. Being able to assist your customers, we could go in here and say, what happens if we deployed
Yeah.
Forescout here or here or here, and see if that makes a difference to your kind of your security posture,
And
right?
especially, what if we deploy this policy, right? We have this kind of visualization for segmentation policies, right? So we track the communication between the different assets, and you can, put on top of that your rules. Like if you're adhering to IEC 62443, you could, look at, do I have cross Purdue level communication? And then we
Right.
visualize where it's happening. But you go beyond this and actually say, okay, what if I now disable this account, or what if I now block this, right? And you can then say, well, that's not a good idea because you actually bring down the production, or something like that.
Right, exactly. And to help out our customers, we have this thing called APS, which is the mitigation prioritization score. It's made up of a bunch of variables that help us determine whether this is something you should work on now, next, or later. And let's see if we can view this in the attack path if possible. Awesome, we can. So let's talk about ransomware attack paths, right? Uh, this is our attack path table. We can go in and select, the slew of threat actors we want to look at. Let's see if we can find um, right here. We have some Iranian-based ransomware, right? We can see the complexity of the attack and whatnot. And let's see. Let's go. Let's view this admin office to um, this kind of unknown address. It looks like a VPN or some sort of gateway into the OT system. Now we can look at the individual steps performed, right,
Hmm.
by Syra, right? And sometimes Syra is able to come in here and give you exact commands on how to test things. And we can go individually. We can also look at the threat actor. Now, Syra assumes the personality or the MO of these threat actors or threat campaigns. The purpose of that is because threat actors generally don't, based off of our research, they don't change their TTPs or exploits too often. So you can almost kind of predict how they would get in, what they would use to move and do whatever. Um,
Yeah, they start to develop, right, their trend, their signature in a way.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, exactly. And then also, if you want to see, exactly what Syra was doing, this is her log where you can, export this, hand it to, whoever, to even validate, does this make sense? Is their remote desktop open on this server? My guess is yes, it's a server. And how else are you gonna, you're gonna just KVM into it? But yeah, you can export this, download it anywhere, give it to your internal red team, whoever. But these, this goes back to what I was talking about, Christina. Like they're not going after the OT assets. They're going after the stuff that's a little bit more upstream that could
Hmm.
have effects there. But I mean, their overall goal is ransomware, right? They want to extort money and whatnot, and they're going to hit whatever they can hit.
Oh yeah. I mean, sometimes I feel like it's just about, disrupting. There are hacktivists that just want to make a name for themselves, so it's all at risk. So no, for sure. I really like that. It shows you the steps of how she, it takes it from, okay, I did this and now I do that. That's really cool.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. This is the end of the demo and whatnot, but Christina, do you have time to take some questions if there are any questions? I know
Yeah,
that we took a
sure.
few as we were going. Here, let me stop sharing my screen just so I can open up the Q&A. So one question I saw is like, all right, so we saw what they could do and everything, generally based off of kind of your research and what you've seen at Forescout. What's the best way to defend against ransomware?
Well, the best thing is, of course, to have the visibility, right? That's where it starts. To have, the weak security addressed. I mean, things like the default accounts, just having internet connectivity, like on systems like IP cameras, right? Disable all those web services that you don't use anyway. So that's, already a great way to just limit the exposure. And then the next step is, of course, detecting, further, segmentation. And what I always keep highlighting, make sure you understand, right, what is dependent on each other. So if there is this crucial IT system that OT ends up depending on, and if that gets attacked, it's part of your crown jewels. It's part of the perimeter. It needs to be secured just like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think we're coming close to time. I just want to, thanks for coming on here, Christina. I always like to, let the last words come from the guests on a webinar or a podcast or whatever. So, Christina, do you have any key takeaways? Anything that you want the audience to know?
No, this was really great. I enjoyed the discussion with you. I hope it was exciting also for everyone else. If anybody got excited and wants to try this, we do have self-guided demos as well. And like I said, the threat research, I think we'll send it out in the follow-up. You can sign up for a newsletter or download the latest reports. What are the riskiest devices and what are some of the steps you can do?
All
So
right,
yeah, thank you.
awesome. Thanks, Christina. Well, I appreciate it. Everybody, thanks for attending. Appreciate your time as always. And let's keep safeguarding OT. See ya.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.